Welcome to this podcast, Holistic Creators, where we share our unique and universal stories about shaping the future for the 4 Ps: people, planet, purpose, and profit. My name is Swanette. I'm a mental coach and your host of this show. My intention for this show is to inspire you on your path to a holistic future. So welcome. Hello and welcome to my podcast, Holistic Creators. My name is Swanette and I'm your host. Today my guest is Jackie Bailey. She is the best-selling author of No Problem Parenting, Raising Your Kiddos with More Confidence and Less Fear. Developed Thru Darkness, the difference between being planted and being buried. Hard Notes in Anthology Volume 1 and Self-Centered Leadership, Becoming Influential, Intentional, and Exceptional. So welcome to my show.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I think it is so important to see how we raise our kids and what we set as a seed inside of them, and when they start growing, what will come up as their own personality. So how about you? What is your seed and how is your story about yourself?
Wow. Well, I will start by saying I am a parent and I am a grandparent, but as we all were once a little girl, and I grew up in an abusive home, and I was not heard, I was not seen, and I was pretty much repressed as far as who I was. I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be and what my purpose was, and even I didn't feel that I could plan on a future because I had to survive day to day. And it was being told not to tell that truly did silence me. And I was very uncomfortable in social situations. I was always afraid I might tell something that I'm not supposed to tell, right? So it kept me quiet. I typically didn't speak up unless someone asked me a question. I did give clues to my family as to, not being happy. I used to tell my abuser, who happened to be an older brother of mine, I hate you. I'd shout at him, I hate you, for different reasons. I was always being teased and physically hit as well. And I would be the one that would get in trouble for shouting out such ugly words like I hate you. and yet here I was being abused by this person on a regular basis. And so life seemed pretty unfair, and I was taught early on that my voice didn't matter, that it didn't matter what I had to say. No one was going to hear me anyhow. So
yeah, let me jump in. And I can understand that for most children, being dependent on the social system, their family, it is even worse, because if they don't feel safe and loved at that time, and even worse, are not allowed to speak out and tell their own truth and make themselves visible with the problems.
right.
This is even more dramatic. And I can imagine that a lot of children have these kind of problems in one way or another and are suppressed to really speak out. And I think it's important also to understand for the parents, what are these little signs, like, you say, I'm not happy, or don't feel comfortable, or I hate you, so that they can become aware that something is below and suppressed, and the children get hurt. So,
Right.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think as parents, we need to have our radar up and we need to be looking for those signs. I think it's important to understand that behavior is a symptom of something, right? So if our children are acting up, if they are grumpy, if they're whining all the time, it could be dietary. It could be that they're eating something that they're chronically allergic to. Or it could be that they're going through something emotional and they have no idea how to voice that, how to deal with it. I mean, there's so many things that we as parents sometimes brush under the rug. And I will tell you that my daughter, who is now almost 40, she was in that generation where the internet had just come into play, and she had her first cell phone, in high school. And she's now raising 4 children with this electronic ability, right? And internet is in everything they do. even during the pandemic, they were using the internet to go to school. And so the generation of children that are coming up right now are those who are sort of experimental. You know, we don't know how this technology world is going to affect them for good or bad. And so it's important that parents and grandparents put down the device. You know, when we're communicating with our kids, we want to engage with our kids, put down anything that is a barrier between our kids so we can fully engage with them and look at them and let them know that they are being seen and that they are being heard. And I know how challenging it is to be a parent. Believe me, I've been there. But I think technology is adding so much to those challenges.
Yeah. Going back to your own story, at that time, there was no technology, like you didn't have a mobile phone. And I remember myself, I'm also in this age. We didn't have internet or mobile phone. We had our normal cell phone. And normally this was in the living room, so not a place where you can speak openly.
Right.
So you really had to reach out to people, like, you know, to walk to a friend's house and tell someone. So how did you manage your situation, like, you know, being this child in this abusive situation with your family?
Well, my parents divorced when I was about 11, and then both remarried. And it's interesting that my stepmother was wonderful. My stepfather was also wonderful. And that was like a new set of parents that I could try to communicate with, right? And yet it wasn't easy. And I do recall because I lived with my mother and her new husband, and yet visited my father and his new wife every other weekend or so. Because I was with my stepfather most of the time, I tried to gravitate toward him. He was a very intelligent man, very traditional, very open to the idea of giving me, and I had a twin brother at that time, giving us all the opportunities possible for us. We were still in high school at that point, and I gravitated toward him, and yet my mother became jealous of the relationship that he and I had. Not that there was anything inappropriate going on, but even at times when he was sitting down with me to just help me with something related to school, or to just sitting in the living room having a conversation with him about something. Or there was actually one occasion he came into my bedroom to help me lay some carpet. I was redecorating my bedroom, and he was coming in to give me some advice on how to lay this carpet, and my mother just became so angry and accused me of having this sexual relationship with him. Here I was, a high school girl. And so again, I learned lessons of, you know, I can't be who I want to be. I have to be careful with everybody. No one is worthy of being trusted. I can't even trust myself. And I must be a horrible person because I can't have these, you know, good relationships with people. And so how did I cope? Well, I remember thinking, even back then, that I had to be the best person I could be, because I had to find reasons to be blessed, right? If I made bad decisions, if I went against what I thought was good and righteous, so to speak, then I would be worthy of punishment. So I did everything I could to try to be the good girl, right? And I actually was a really good kid. I remember thinking about that I have to just be good so that I have the opportunity to be blessed. But I also remember thinking that if I could get through this, I will be very strong. Someday I will be strong. Someday I will be a different person. I won't be this person who's quieted, who's shut up, who's having to be someone she's not. Someday I will be who I want to be. I remember thinking that even from the earliest days. So I think those little voices in my head that would talk to me and say, be good, you know, make good choices, and someday you'll be strong because of this. That's really what got me through.
What do you think, what gave you this faith or confidence that one day you will be the one who will speak out and being the authentic you?
Well, I lived in a religious home, and I did say my nightly prayers. My prayers were mostly things like, I would say, please help me to sleep well tonight, meaning don't let him come in, essentially what that meant. But I didn't even have the words to really say what I meant. So when I would pray, help me sleep well, it meant don't let me be awakened by an abusive situation. Many nights, of course, that prayer was not answered in the way I wanted it to be. But I always had a belief that there was someone there. I mean, it's really the only thing I could hold on to, that the people that were in my life who I did see on a daily basis, they weren't very helpful to me. The only hope I had is that there was someone, some being, some ultimate source that was in some way watching over me, even though I didn't feel like my requests were always being answered in the way I wanted them to be. I did have that faith in something. And so I think that's what helped me to keep going as well. And that's what gave me that self-talk, is that I've got to be worthy of some sort of blessing. If there is a being there, and that's the person who blesses me for my good acts, then I just need to be good, essentially. So
Yeah, wow. And what I see is also that being in this connection to God or this higher source, however you want to call that, and we all have our idea how this
right.
higher power can be described. This gave you like this understanding or this faith that, okay, you know, one day there will be a turnaround, and I will be the one who is blessed and who is strong and can step into this purpose you have and
Yeah.
you are living now. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that I didn't necessarily have too many occasions where my belief in this source of good and light was validated for me, and yet I did have experiences where the opposite was true, where there was definitely something evil. There was evil lurking in my home, and there was evil that at times would come into my room. It wasn't something I could see, but there was this feeling. And so there was always this, well, if that's true, if there's this evil that I can feel so deeply, then there must be an opposite of that. There must be something good if this is the evil that I'm feeling. So I had this faith that there was a heavenly Father, although it wasn't always validated as much as I would like for it to be. But on the other side, I did know that there was something opposite to that. So therefore, there must be something real about a heavenly source of some kind.
And I think we understand about this higher source when we go through our darkest moments and are confronted with this evil and yeah, what can happen to us. And from there we go strong and become the leader of our lives as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, there came a time when so there were several abusers in my life, but the one who was most chronic was, as I mentioned, an older brother. And I managed to be happy. I managed to get married. I managed to have 2 children. And when they were still quite young, this older brother of mine got married, and their first child was a girl. And now I am faced with this situation where I can either allow this next victim to be formed, or I'm going to have to say something so that at least people are aware that she's in danger, right? And yet I had never spoken about this. Never, I had never voiced that this was happening to me, and I wasn't even sure how to define it or describe it or what words I would use to talk about it. And it really sent me into an emotional crisis. And again, I had to rely on some sort of source of power beyond what I could see or have around me in my life at that point, because I had this tremendous decision that only I could make. There wasn't someone I could go to for advice. I had to make this decision to either continue to stay silent and go on with my life as managed and happy as it was, and make sure that I just take care of what I could, or I thought about taking my own life so that I didn't have to live with the consequences of any choice that I made, or I had to speak out and I had to finally say something. And the risk for me in doing that was that I didn't know if my husband would still want to be married to me, because I felt so ugly and ashamed inside. I was like taking this mask off, and was he now going to see the real me? Also, I didn't know that I'd be believed by anybody, and maybe I would be thought crazy. And so my kids might be taken from me because I'm this crazy woman who's spouting off these things that can't possibly be true. So there was a lot at risk, but what I finally decided is that, one, I couldn't live with myself if I let this other little girl be abused. But I also couldn't leave this world knowing that my own children might be in danger if no one knew that there was this threat. So I loved my own kids more than I hated myself, and I started to break the silence. I first told my husband why I was in such an emotional crisis, and I was really awful. I was just angry all the time. I was an awful parent during about 6 to 7 months of that time frame because I was in this crisis. And so he was a little bit relieved knowing the truth because he thought it was him. He thought that I was just unhappy with our relationship and unhappy with our marriage. But to know that there was another reason that I was in such distress, it at least relieved that from him. And he was very supportive, understood, and helped me to start seeing a therapist, and that was a really big step. And so the therapist, of course, helped me to then start breaking the silence to other people, help me identify first those people who would most likely believe me and support this journey I was about to take, and do that slowly. So that's what I did.
Yeah, and this is so important and amazing, because I think that taking this responsibility to break the pattern for, of course, the daughter of your brother, but also for yourself, like being the victim. So
Right.
I see that there are two perspectives on that, like breaking old patterns that can be given over from one generation to the next one. And of course, this could also mean if you don't speak up, and there would be a situation you are not aware of for your own children, like
Right.
no, you said no, with the internet and the connections that are made, you don't have any control about on that. So no, there could be a situation where they get abused. In what way? Yeah, and
Absolutely.
yeah. So this is so important, and thank you for doing that.
Oh, well, I appreciate you saying that. Looking back at it today, you'd say, well, Gal, yeah, you got to break the silence, but it's just not that easy. It's just not that easy. It's, when I was maybe 22 years old, still young, and I had the weight of the world on my shoulders, and I knew that any decision I made was going to affect a lot of people. And then hearing that voice in my head is, if you get through this, you're going to be strong. If you get through this, you're going to be strong. And so I knew that there was purpose for this, and that if I could live through this, all this pain that now was being churned up again, I'd be okay. And the first day I saw this therapist, actually I went to see one therapist, and the first question she asked me was, do you think you need to divorce your husband? I'm like, wait, where's that coming from? I said, no, I don't think I need to do that. And I didn't go back to her, but I was referred to somebody else, and she asked me a question too that was out of the blue, because I had just spilled my guts to her about, as best I could, explaining to her what had happened to me. And her question to me was, well, do you think you can forgive? Wait, what? That seemed like so almost humorously ridiculous at that moment, that she would ask me to do something that seemed as impossible as picking up a truck and throwing it across the road. Because here I'm filled with all of this pain in that moment, and she's asking me if I could just release it all and let it all go. And it was like, no. But then she clarified. She said to me, well, you don't have to forgive tomorrow or the next day or 10 years from now or ever. But if you're not at least working toward the possibility of being able to do that someday, you're never going to fully heal from this. Those are very wise words, and they gave me something to work toward, because it took the pressure off of, okay, I don't have to do that right now. It seems impossible. Maybe someday I can build up those metaphorical muscles enough that I could literally pick up a truck and throw it across the road and be able to forgive. So it seemed like it went along with the same words that were in my head. Someday you'll be a strong person. Someday you'll be a strong person. And I was thinking, well, maybe being able to forgive is part of that strength that I'm going to be able to at least work toward developing. So that really helped me to set my journey toward some possibility that I could do that at some point.
Yeah, and I think about this forgiveness, it's more from your side to forgive than accepting or tolerating what has happened to you. So it's like the release from your side and coming out of this anger and whatever emotions, shame could be another one, that were inside of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I probably had that momentary thought of, gosh, why would I do that? He doesn't deserve that, which is what a lot of reactions I get from women who hear my story. They get a little bit triggered from their own experiences, and they have actually gotten angry at me to say, why would you even forgive him? Think about forgiving such a monster. You know, how could you even do that? And I probably had that fleeting thought as well. But over the years, I realized that it really wasn't about him. It was really about me, and it was about that strength I was trying to obtain, and that I knew that if I could do that, I would have achieved that strength I was looking for. And so there was a point in my therapy, one of the toughest days I had in therapy was when I had written a letter to my brother. And I had basically, it was accusatory, and I basically said, this is what you did to me. And as best I could, outline every feeling, every emotion that I felt because of his actions throughout years of my life. And I even used the words, you killed me. You killed my soul. You killed who I could have been. You killed opportunities that I didn't take because I was afraid, you know, things like that. And then my counselor said, well, you can burn it. You can tear it into little tiny pieces. You can fold it up and store it somewhere, or you can read it to him. You could even mail it to him if you wanted to, but you could read it to him. What would you like to do, Jackie? And again, this was one of these moments is like, okay, what am I going to do? What am I what can I do? What are my possibilities, right? As to where I was at that time. And I decided that if I wanted to be as strong as possible, I would need to sit in a room with him and read it to him face to face.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a courage to make this kind of decision and really confronting him with what has happened to you and the emotions that were inside of you during that time, and bringing him really into this process. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So
I mean, I decided I wasn't going to heal halfway. You know, if this was something that was going to bring me that strength, and like I said, I keep repeating that word strength, but that was what I'd been telling myself my whole life. And I kept now using every opportunity, like, is this going to make me stronger or is this not going to make me stronger? And so everything, that was the way that I measured everything. And so as I thought of this choice I had, about what's going to make me the strongest? Is it going to be mailing it to him and never knowing if he actually got it or if he opened it or if he read it or what he thought about it, what he had to say? Was there any defense? You know, there would have been so many more questions in my mind than if I just faced him, read it to him, and then watched what happened. You know, all those questions would be answered for me. So that's what I decided to do. And I was advised not to do it alone, which was good advice, but I knew that my husband was not the person that I wanted sitting by me because he knew my brother and he would be angry. I didn't know what his reaction might be. So I asked an acquaintance to just come and sit with me in my living room. I invited my brother to come to my house on a particular day, and I just invited this. She was also a neighbor, an acquaintance and a neighbor, and I said, would you just come and sit by me? You don't have to say anything or do anything, you just have to sit by me. And I'm so grateful to her that she did that. And so I sat in front of my brother and I read this letter to him. That was very difficult. And by the way, my husband had written all these little notes for me, and he'd hung them on the inside of cabinet doors and where I'd pick up my purse and whatever. He kept these little notes. They all said, you can do this. You'll be really strong. You're courageous. You know, on that day as I was preparing for this, I didn't want to back down. So anyway, that was kind of sweet. And after I read this letter to him, most surprising to me at all is that he didn't deny anything. And I got to tell you, Swanette, for the first time, that validated to me that what I was actually speaking was truth. Because there's always this little bit of doubt in your head because the abuse always took place in the middle of the night. So there was always this little voice in my head that was saying, you dreamed that. And if you dreamed that, what a horrible person you are for dreaming such a thing. And so when I confronted him with this and everything I accused him of doing and he didn't deny it, that was the first time when I knew that I was telling the truth, as silly as that might sound. And that did give me strength. That absolutely strengthened me, knowing for the very first time what I'm saying is really true. And then I learned something else, which I didn't expect, is that I mentioned that I'd grown up in a religious home. We went to church every Sunday. And what I didn't know is my brother told me on that occasion that he had gone to a clergy member and had confessed. He had confessed what he had been doing to me. And I don't know exactly the details that he divulged to this clergy member, but his words back to me, my brother's words back to me on that occasion was, he said that because you didn't know that no harm was done to you. And so he didn't have to do anything. I mean, he was basically forgiven by this clergy member. Now, I can tell you no one ever came to me. No clergy member ever came to me and said, let me talk to you about, anything that might be bothering you or anything you're unhappy with. I don't think any clergy ever talked to my parents about the possibility, because when I broke the silence to my father, he had no idea. My mother, by the way, was the last one I broke the silence to because she was the one I didn't think would believe me. And in fact, when I told my dad about the abuse, that was the first thing he said. He goes, your mom's not going to believe you. That's what he said. Anyhow, I digress. But I learned from my brother that he had confessed to one clergy member who told him, Jackie doesn't know, so don't worry about it. And then he went about trying to have a normal life after that. And he said, I still didn't feel good about it. There was still something not right. And so he went to a clergy member in a higher position than the first one. And this continued 2 more times. he's telling me this on that occasion. He's saying, I thought I had done everything I could to make this right for me, he said. And so the fact that I was coming to him now in this accusatory tone, I think he felt sad that it did affect me. He felt sad that it had affected me because he was being told that I didn't. I was okay. I didn't know. No harm done, right? And so here I am now in this position where I thought I was going to be able to release all this anger toward him. And now I had anger directed at a different source. It was these clergy members to some degree. But the door to compassion for my brother was opened wide. I never expected that. I really thought in the scenario I played out in my head is that he was going to deny all this. He was going to get angry. He was going to storm out. And, you know, that would be the end of it. That is not what happened. And so my anger now is directed in a different place, but I had this compassion for my brother, knowing, and I believed him. I really did believe him. I believed that he had tried to make this right and thought he had. So that brought me closer to that possibility of maybe I could forgive. Maybe I could forgive someday. It brought me closer to that point.
And you definitely broke the cycle. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that now as members of the family are aware, your brother is aware that you spoke out, that this cannot become invisible again.
Right.
And
yeah, in fact, I told him in that letter when I read to him, I said, if you ever hurt your daughter, I will do everything in my power to get her from you. And he said to me after that, he said, I would never hurt her. I never will hurt her. I promise you that. That's what he said. And again, I believed that would be true. And so his wife now knew, at that point, his wife knew that he had a problem. And it wasn't long before he and his wife divorced, which is a sad thing, but it led to the protection of his daughter because now she was not living with him full time. And when she was able to visit her father, she was never allowed to stay the night with him. She was never allowed to be alone with him, essentially. And so he kept his promise, but also it was made aware that there was an issue that everybody needed to protect this little girl. And so I did my part. I did what I could do, and it was worth it to be alive so that I could make sure this little girl was safe and that my own children were safe. And let me skip ahead about 30 years because I didn't know what really happened to that little girl, to my niece, because we moved away eventually. I knew that he and his wife had divorced, but he'd also had a couple other relationships, my brother, and he had some twin boys out of wedlock, and his life was kind of miserable. But 30 years later, I'm going to skip ahead, not knowing how my niece was cared for and the circumstances of her growing up, she called me when she was, I don't know, 27, 28 years old or so. And she had just learned that her father had these issues all those years ago. And she was so surprised by it. And so in asking her mother to try to explain to her how dad could have these problems, she said, my mom said, you need to talk to your Aunt Jackie. You need to talk to your Aunt Jackie about it. So she called me and she said, I just want to know. I just want to know what my dad was like back then because he never hurt me. That was so awesome. But I learned that she was never harmed. And she never even knew that her dad had an issue. So that helped me to know, again, that something I did and breaking that silence really did save her life, or at least saved her from having a life like I had had.
Yeah, and it helped you to really become strong and I think also to step into your purpose.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let us a little bit knowing more about how this all comes together with what you're doing now, because having this kind of experience is, yeah, really so, I don't know the English word, so massive. And like now understanding, okay, what is really driving you to help the kids to speak out, and let us know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, of course, I'd love to. Well, so I was able to forgive my brother. I got to a point where I did feel forgiveness for him, and I flew back home and faced him one more time, and I said, I forgive you. I just uttered those 3 miraculous words to him, I forgive you. And I will say that at that time, he had been in and out of prison. He had, like I said, he had some broken relationships, another broken marriage. He couldn't hold a job very well. He was living a miserable life. And when I told him that I had forgiven him, what I didn't realize is that I had somehow become the keeper of the keys to his prison. That at one point we had flipped from me being his victim and he being so powerful over me to me holding power over him, and now I was in some way victimizing him by not forgiving him, by not giving him the permission now to progress in the life he's always wanted and tried so hard for many years ago and thought he was doing what he could to attain that. And so when I said, I forgive you, he broke down, we cried together, and his life completely changed. And he became a wonderful man, took care of his kids, had better relationships, was a great employer, and things changed for him. But it was in 2015 or so when he made a mistake. He made a mistake. He backslid a little bit and was found as a voyeur watching a little girl take a shower. And he went to prison for that again. And this is when his daughter learned of what his past was. He had been arrested for this mistake that he made. Broke my heart that he'd worked so hard to make his life better, and in one moment, he swears it was the first time in all those years that he'd made that mistake, and he was caught. And you know, we all have those demons that can sometimes come back and haunt us. But so it was during that time then that my niece had called me and said, you know, tell me about what my dad was like when he was younger. And I did. And it was at that same time in 2015 when I was competing in an international speech contest. And I was sharing my story of abuse and forgiveness to international audiences. And I was winning these competitions, and I was going to the semifinals, which means I had been the top, I'd been named the top 90 of 33,000 competitors. And I was sharing this story. And then that same summer, while I was preparing to go, I learned of my brother's misdeeds. And it was sad, but also enjoyable to hear that my niece had been saved from that. Well, after this competition, then I became a little bit famous in my area. And there was a group of parents who were homeschooling their kids, and they called me and said, we'd like for you to come and teach our kids some public speaking skills. Hey, I could do that. I could do that. And mind you, I was feeling a little bit down because I didn't win the final level of this competition, and I was thinking this was my year. I was going to do this. And so when I didn't, I was feeling a little bit down. And so this opportunity came at the right time. And someone said, we want you to come teach this group of 9 kids public speaking skills. And it was the first time I'd considered doing something like that. And so all of this was happening that summer, and I realized I could give kids a voice. I could give kids a voice. I could help them recognize the power they have to speak and that it is their superpower. And so I took this opportunity and I developed curriculum for this little 9-week course. And they loved it, and I immediately saw the benefits of this to kids. On our first day together, these kids who were probably 13, 14, maybe 15 years old, they wouldn't look at me. They didn't look at each other. They just were not sure of themselves. And after just 2 or 3 sessions, wow, their countenance changed. They were standing up taller. They were speaking out more strongly. And I could see an immediate impact that just a little bit of this could do for our kids. So I began to develop more and more curriculum, and pretty soon I was renting out community centers, or I was using conference rooms at business parks, or I was using classrooms in schools, any place I could find, even like little private dining rooms in restaurants, any place I could find to get a group of 10 or 12 kids together and do these courses with them. And the classes were selling out quickly, and it was tremendous. And I was seeing the great impact we were making. And then in 2019, I found a little 100-year-old house that was zoned for commercial use. My husband and I gutted the entire inside of it. We created a classroom and some other little conference rooms. And I started holding classes then at the Speak, Feed, Lead public speaking studio in Redmond, Washington, in the United States. And for the first time, I had kids coming to me instead of driving miles and miles every week to teach these classes. And it was wonderful. And that's when I realized there are so many kids who are benefiting from these programs, and yet what about those who can't afford our programs? What about those who need this just as much and it's out of their family's budget? So I started to talk with the public schools, who told me, well, if you're not a nonprofit, we really can't collaborate with you on projects like this. So that was the impetus to become a nonprofit organization. We call it the Speak, Feed, Lead Project. And now we can work with schools and other nonprofit organizations and corporations to bring these courses to all children so that they can all be empowered with their knowledge that their voice is worthy of being heard. They have a message that is inspiring to the world, and we're listening. We are listening to them. So,
yeah, amazing, amazing. How does such a program look like? So if a child would come to you kind of shy and not really able or to speak out, how does this get started, and how do they grow during the process?
That's a great question. And the reason that we developed the curriculum the way we have it currently is because parents were coming to us and saying, my kid doesn't talk to me. If I ask him or her a question, I get this grunt, or I get a fine or a whatever, right? How can you get my kid to talk to me? That was what a lot of parents were asking us. And so we decided that the focus of our first units of curriculum would be about conversation. How do we get our kids feeling confident to just converse with people, to know what kinds of questions you could ask, how to listen effectively, and then how to respond appropriately so that a conversation can be held with the objective of knowing or learning something exciting or interesting about this person, and recognizing that every person has value, and just by talking to them, you learn what that value is, and you understand that they can inspire you with their stories. And so it doesn't take long before our kids start to really feel empowered. And I call them my kids. They're my students, but I call them my kids. It doesn't take long for them to start feeling empowered and confident about just simple conversation like we're having. If I were to ask like a 13-year-old boy to have a conversation with me like this, there's no way he would have done that before he's taken our courses. And now our students are actually hosting podcasts like this. They decide, what would I want to talk about? What do I want to be when I grow up? Who's my hero, whether it's in sports or science or technology? Who would I want to talk to if I had an opportunity? And then we help them develop a podcast about that particular subject matter and help them write a professional invitation to a potential guest. They send it out, and then hopefully they get the guest they want. They come on our show, which is actually our classroom, and they get to interview an idol of theirs or a hero of theirs for maybe 10 or 15 minutes as a mock podcast. And so they learn how to convert with people or have conversations with people, sorry. And then they actually put that into application through an interview on a podcast. And Swanette, I cannot tell you how fun that is for the kids and how inspiring it is for me to see them use these newfound skills in a way that ignites their desire for whatever they want to be. They see this potential of, wow, I can talk to anybody. I can talk to my parents better. I can talk to my friends, and I can make friends easier. I'm no longer afraid to raise my hand in class if I don't understand something being taught. And this is setting them up for failure no more, because now they're going to have success in everything they do, and they're going to feel empowered by it. They're going to feel confident. And so we see it really quickly. From the start of our programs.
Yeah, and I can only imagine like having the ability to communicate with the parents will make a massive impact, but also where the community you surround yourself with, like if these are idols or other peers or even speaking out in the bigger community. So this is super important, and yeah, I think understanding also that this is an impact they're making with this podcast. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Now it's not published. We record it, and they have access to do what they want with it. But because they're minors, I'm not going to publish something out there unless their parents want them to. But they have a copy of it, and they can now use that when they're applying for colleges or special programs. They can say, I hosted my own podcast. Here's my 3 episodes where I interviewed so-and-so and so-and-so. And it gives them even more likability when there's a board looking at incorporating them into their university or a program or something. They say, wow, this child has really got some confidence that he or she can talk to someone they admire like that. And the next step from there is that many of our students in the last year have spoken on international summits, which they've become all the rage since the pandemic started, right? We couldn't meet together, but we found ways to get together, and that was online on these summits. And so many of these organizers of summits have said, wow, it would be delightful to have some youth speakers on here, and let's hear their perspective on these subjects or on life. And they've come to me and said, do you think you could get 10 or 20 kids to speak on our summit? And of course I say, yeah, let's go for that. And so last year, 2022, 60 speaking slots on various international summits were filled by kids ages 10 to 20. And so they get to put their voice out into the world. They get to talk about whatever excites them, which they don't get in school. Nobody in school asks them to talk about what they really love. No. And so this is an opportunity for them to say to the world, this is who I am. This is what I love. This is what I want to be. This is what I'm doing now. And this is how it can benefit you by knowing my perspective. So it's really exciting. So we're thrilled with what we're being able to do.
Yeah, and I think it helps them also to be excited about learning about other people, learning about the topic, whatever it is. So they come into this feeling of constant learning and not stopping because it excites them themselves. So they really are into that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, one of our students, we typically work with kids that are age 10, but this girl was 9 years old, and she impressed me enough that we brought her into the programs. And she spoke on her first summit a year ago. So she was 9 years old. She spoke on the Voices of Women Summit, where there were about 200 women from around the world speaking. And on one of the calls after the summit was over, we all met in a Zoom room, and her name is Uma. Uma looked around and just saw all these women that she was on the stage with. Some of them famous, some of them leaders known well in their community, and she was so excited that she was one of them. At 9 years old, she felt part of a community. of women, and I think found her place, you know. And she talked about a trip that her family had made to Zambia when she was 6 or 7, and noticed all the girls her age were at work. They were working in restaurants, or they were scrubbing laundry, or, you know, doing manual labor in different places. And she asked her mother, why aren't they at school? And her mother explained that the government doesn't support the girls' education. They only pay for education for boys. And so because these families would have to pay for their daughters' education, and many of them can't afford it, the daughters just have to work. And this made Uma feel so sad that she decided she was going to do whatever she could to help these girls to feel like they could get an education. So when she would speak on these summits, that's what she talks about. She talks about how education should be open for everybody, and that when she's capable of making a difference, she's going to. And so it's just really sweet. And just last month, at the date of this taping here, in March of 2023, Uma traveled with me to Los Angeles, California, and she gave a keynote speech at the Best You Expo at the Los Angeles Convention Center in front of thousands of people. She's only now 10 years old, and she gave her keynote speech. And you can't get better than that. Just can't get better than that.
This is so super impressive. And I have spoken on the Voices of Women Summit as well, and understanding my age and her age, and she is already so confident and able to lead with her voice. This is super impressive. Yes. Wow.
Yeah,
so
very exciting.
Yeah, I can imagine that now parents who are listening say, okay, this is something that I would like to have for my children as well. So how can they reach out to you? How can they get more information about what you're doing, about your program? Where are you to find?
Yeah, well, thank you for that opportunity. I appreciate it. As I mentioned before, we are called the Speak, Feed, Lead Project, and you can find us on the internet at speakfeedlead.org, O-R-G. That is our nonprofit. And Speak, Feed, Lead are those 3 little words that not only are the name of our foundation, but they define what our curriculum does. So we help kids to speak with power. We help them to feed others through inspirational words and actions. And then we help them to become positive, influential leaders. And so that is what we are doing. And we have ongoing courses that can be as long as 8 weeks, or we have 3-week type courses. I also offer private coaching opportunities. So if your child needs a personal essay written or recorded on video to get into a special program or into college, we can work with them on a short-term basis to get them ready for that, write their script, even film the video if necessary. We also have smaller week workshops for podcasting and for getting onto these summits. Let's say you want your child to speak on a summit. Well, we got to get them prepped for that. We got to get them ready and confident. So we offer some courses in helping them to do that. And then the 8-week courses we have are progressive. So they start with one 8-week course. Once they complete that, it puts them makes them eligible for the next 8-week course. And many of our students have been with us for 3 years now because they have been perpetually moving forward in each of these 8-week stages that we offer them. So anytime you look at our website, you'll find programs that we have going on, and you can always contact me and let me know what your needs are, and we'll see if we have a program that will help you with that.
Wow, yes. And are you working in person, or so people have to travel to the US, or also working via Zoom or other?
Most of what we do now is virtual, thanks to the pandemic. Because yes, I'm sitting in my public speaking studio in Redmond, Washington. However, because we couldn't meet together during the pandemic, We pivoted all of our curriculum to an online version, and now I have students all around the world. I have students in India and Australia, in China, and all around the US. And so if we were to go back only in person, we would lose most of our students. So we are virtual, and like I said, I'm used to the time zone differences with our kids in Australia and China and India. So wherever you are in the world, we're going to find a way to create a course that's going to help you and a group of kids that you know or want to support in your area. So we'll make it happen.
Amazing. So I will put the URL in the show notes so that it is easy to just click on and find you and your programs.
Thank you.
Last but not least, is there anything that you would like to share that I didn't ask you?
Well, the reason this is so important to parents is because maybe your children weren't abused like I was. Statistics would say that the probability is high, and many times kids won't say anything about it because they don't know what it means. They don't know how to define it. So it might be safe to assume that there's been something that has occurred with your child. But beyond that, they've all been silenced in some way, many times by us, when we say, don't ask me again, just go do what I say. Or when we speak at them all the time instead of asking them questions like, get your backpack, get your lunch, get out the door, you're going to be late. When we make statements to them all the time instead of asking them questions that are going to lead to actual responses and important information, we silence our children. We do it unknowingly. And the reason that our programs are so powerful and helpful is because it gives our kids an opportunity, perhaps for the first time, to talk about what makes them happy, what brings them joy, what is most challenging for them, what and who would they talk to if they could, what would they talk about if given an opportunity to speak about anything they wanted. When my grandson Sam, who is now a teenager, when he was 9 years old, I asked him that question once. I said, Sam, if the whole world could come into your living room and they asked you, Sam, tell us the most important thing, I said, what would you say to them? At 9 years old, Sam's response was, first of all, Grandma, I'd tell them to get out of my living room. And secondly, I would tell them to get off the video games and go spend time with their family. At 9 years old, Sam had the most important message that many families need to hear, and that is spend time together rather than virtually on something that doesn't do you any good. And so no matter how young our children are, they have messages that can empower us and help us. And so that's what I want you to know, parents. Your kids need to be heard. They need to feel that they're being heard, and they need to have opportunities to share really what they love and the right and wonderful wisdom that they have to share with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing your story on the one hand, and then seeing how important is the work you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing this on my show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Swanette.
Yeah, hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you for listening or watching my podcast, Holistic Creators. If you want to know more about how I can help and support you, have a look at my website, spiritualchangemaker.com. You can also join my Facebook group, Spiritual Changemakers Community. Stay tuned for the next episode by subscribing to this channel. And you also can check the previous episodes.